Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
A husband and wife have an argument about his wife's fidelity, and during the heat of the argument, the wife says the following. Today's story has a similar plot. Enjoy watching it. This story began on an ordinary evening, a few drinks in the bar of one of the city's hotels, then dinner and home. It was something that Jill, my sweet young wife, and I did about once every couple of weeks. However, that evening we decided to have some fun and went to a nicer place than usual. Maybe the way Jill dressed that evening should have given me a clue, but she always looked fantastic. Jill always dressed beautifully and had the figure to go with it. The advantage for me was that a girl like her didn't actually need a bra, and the only one she very rarely wore. Her legs were perhaps her best feature, again on the slender side, but very long with a nice shape, and they looked amazing in any high-heeled shoes. Somehow Jill used her legs to compensate for her lack of height. Her longest skirts rarely reached mid-thigh, and oh boy, you should have seen what Jill could do with a pair of skinny jeans. No, my Jill was slim, true, but not skinny or shapeless. Think of some of the best runway models, cut them down 7 or 8 inches in height, and there you have it, my wife Jill. She wasn't always so confident in her appearance. When I first met her a few years ago at a friend's house, she always wore baggy jeans and an even shapelier sweater. She hid it. She was ashamed of her breasts, or lack thereof, so to speak, and tried her best to disguise what she had. I vaguely remember the next few times I met her thinking she had a pretty face and that her hair looked good in her usual ponytail, quite nice, actually. But besides that, nothing. Absolutely nothing. I barely even remembered her name. Then one weekend, we all went swimming at the local pool. Nothing fancy, no sunbathing or anything, just a few hours of sailing back and forth and a bit of fun. There were 6 girls there that day, 5 in bikinis and Jill. She was wearing a skimpy swimsuit that her grandmother might have worn, but even so, it couldn't hide from my eyes what her baggy clothes had been carefully hiding for the previous few months. She was truly great. Okay, very slim, maybe too slim if you like curvy women, but never skinny. Her slim body was too curvy for that. I couldn't take my eyes off her. I couldn't believe it was the same woman. Saw something you like, Glenn? My best friend's wife Wendy asked me with a grin. Well, I didn't realize she was so. I know what you mean, Glenn, Wendy continued. I wish I was built like that and had a body like that, but she hides it. She's a fool. Oh, you're not bad either, Wendy, I said, screwing up a little. I know what you mean, Glenn, Wendy told me, laughing at my embarrassment. I'm not your type, but don't worry, some guys like big-breasted girls like me, and luckily my husband is one of them. I smiled at her, nodded my head in agreement, thanking her for freeing me from awkwardness. Come and talk to her, Glenn, Wendy suggested. Jill hasn't dated a man in a long time. Jill? I repeated, a little ashamed that I didn't even remember her name, although I had already been in her company several times. She doesn't have a boyfriend, you say? She had a long-term boyfriend who she dated for years, my personal matchmaker continued. She and John started dating when they were in school, and it just kept going. What happened? I asked, interested in any information about Jill at that time. He was tired because he couldn't get her into bed, Wendy explained quite directly. We all warned her, told her to relax, but she didn't listen. Then she caught him one evening having an intimate with some girl from his work in his car, and that was it. And after that, she didn't have any other boyfriends? I asked cautiously. Not really, she replied, frowning sadly. Nothing serious. So she's still a virgin? I snapped out of it before I could stop myself. Oh God, no, Greg, Wendy exclaimed, giggling. She went crazy for 6 months after that. She gave herself to anyone who was even kind to her. She became a real available girl for a while. I think it was her attempt to get back at him. How sad, my heart somehow responded to hers. And what's next? She didn't tell us anything, but I think she was scared of some kind of STD. Nothing serious, you know. I don't know if she caught it or not, but it gave her a boost and she came to her senses. STD? Oh damn, I muttered, feeling a bit off-putting. Wendy saw my scared look. "Don't worry about STDs," she told me. "It's not that uncommon, you know. I've been sick twice myself and recovered, Greg. It's just a matter of a few shots, right?" "Yes, okay," I muttered, feeling uncomfortable. What a revelation. Maybe I should be a little more selective in choosing my friends in the future. But that didn't mean I wasn't really impressed with Jill, and I made sure to stay close to her for the next half hour while we all had fun in the pool. It took almost 2 weeks before I finally decided to ask her out, and when I did, her reaction surprised me. "You, Greg?" she replied with obvious surprise. "Do you want me to go on a date with you?" "That's what I just asked, Jill," I happily reminded her. "What's wrong with me?" "But you, well, you're kind of handsome, and you have a fancy sports car and a lot of money. What do you want from a girl like me?" "Okay," I replied, trying not to laugh. "I have a sports car, and maybe if I didn't have one, I'd have a lot of money. I just like you, Jill." "What's weird about that?" "Are you serious?" Jill asked me nervously. "Do you really like me?" "Of course," I quickly replied, smiling. "Are you kidding me?" she asked apprehensively. "No, Jill," I told her, taking her hand. "You're an attractive girl. Why shouldn't I like you?" "But I'm so skinny," she complained. "I don't have breasts or anything. Men just don't like me." "You're not like that. You have it, and I sympathize." This seemed to sum up her entire objection, and when the meaning of my answer dawned on her, a smile appeared on her face that practically melted my heart. I think, looking back, it was at this point that I began to fall in love with my future wife. "Jill, you won't disappoint me, will you?" she asked quietly. "Never," I replied, and I meant it. "I've been disappointed by a lot of guys in my life," she said. "I promise," I assured her. "Okay then, Greg." Jill accepted my offer, smiling happier than I had ever seen before. Our courtship was fantastic, and by the way, I learned that the STD story was just a fear. Not that it would have changed anything for me by that point, but it was a bit of a relief nonetheless. On our first date, I had no idea what she would wear, but I hoped it would be something better than baggy jeans and a t-shirt. She made an effort. As I sat in the pub waiting for her to arrive, I was pleasantly surprised to see her walk in wearing a nice pair of trousers and a top that, while it didn't show off her best, at least wasn't baggy and shapeless. She also put on a little makeup, which is something I'd never seen on her before. Quite skillful too, and I later found out that she worked during school holidays for a cosmetics company in a local department store. Even more enjoyable was how well we got along and how many common interests we had. Okay. She didn't actually support Arsenal Football Club, but she had at least heard of them. I even knew the names of several players. After dinner, a few drinks, and a walk around town holding hands, I finally pulled up in front of her house around midnight. "Beautiful car," Jill commented as I stopped my Porsche 911. "Thank you," I replied, smiling at her. We'd already established that Jill, like me, was really into nice cars, so her comment wasn't much of a surprise. Regarding my problem, my thoughts were somewhat conflicted. Jill seemed like a fairly innocent young girl, but on the other hand, Wendy told me about her rather spicy, albeit short, past. What should I do? Kiss her piously and go on my way, risking her thinking I'm some kind of jerk? Or insist on escorting her back to her apartment, try to get into her panties, and risk losing her forever? As it turns out, I didn't have to make that decision. "Will you take me out on a date again?" Jill demanded quite seriously. "Or am I too simple so that I can't see you?" "You, Jill?" I replied, almost laughing. "Too easy. You're a doll, Jill. You are beautiful." "Other guys don't seem to think so," she replied a little sadly. "If I don't go to bed with them on the first date, it looks like I'll never have a second one. When I let them, they quickly lose interest." I wanted to return with a frivolous remark, but at the last moment, I restrained myself, as if I bit my tongue. "Perhaps there is another reason, Jill," I suggested thoughtfully. "You're not really making the best of yourself, are you?" "What do you mean?" she asked with a puzzled look on her face. I took a deep breath, wondering how to say this without upsetting her. Do you have any nice dresses, Jill? I've never seen you in one. I don't have any dresses at all, Greg, she replied. I don't wear them. What about skirts? She shook her head, noting that she just didn't feel comfortable wearing them. High heels? I asked, but this only elicited mocking laughter. Why not? I asked, but I had to repeat the question and force her to give me an answer. They're just not me, Greg. I just don't feel comfortable. I continued to encourage her while putting my arm around her shoulder. Jill hugged me happily but continued to avoid my questions. Our lips found each other, and we just kissed. No passion, no tongues, just a really nice little kiss. I thought it was quite appropriate for a first kiss. I'm too skinny for tight clothes and stuff, Greg. But my legs are long, and in skirts, I look awkward. Where did you get that idea from, a stupid girl? I smiled at her. People tell me, Jill muttered quietly into my chest. What people? I demanded. Oh, just people, she answered in a whisper. I had recently seen Jill in a swimsuit, and while there was no denying that she was quite slim, there was no doubt that she had a lovely little body. If she had just flaunted it, it would have been a killer match for the swimsuit. Who tells you that you are so thin? I asked. All through school, Jill whispered, her face still buried in my chest, her words barely audible. I had to wear a school uniform with a skirt, and I hated it. It was so awkward at school. I screamed in amazement. Yes, some of them treated me terribly. They always said that I had legs like matchsticks and no chest, flat as a pancake. See on top, they teased. That was my nickname. Damn, they all called me Pancake. Who? I demanded. Who teased you? Other girls, she told me. At least one gang did. I could imagine what kind of gang she was talking about, those who thought they were better than everyone else. What about boys? I have tried. No, Jill snorted, ready to cry. I went to an all-girls school. I sat with her in my arms, amazed at how childhood cruelty could affect someone's life for so long. How long have you been out of school, Jill? I had a pretty good idea, but I wanted to make my point. 4 years ago, almost 5, Jill admitted. And you still think you're a lanky schoolgirl? Well, she answered, dodging the question, I'm not a schoolgirl anymore. What about your boyfriend, Jill? What did he say about you? Which guy? She asked, looking at me questioningly. How did you know that I have a boyfriend? Wendy told me, I admitted. She told me you dated him for a while. Yes, she continued, the first tear slowly rolling down her cheek. He always told me that I didn't have breasts and that if I didn't sleep with him, he would leave me. But you didn't, I encouraged her. You survived. Though Greg, it did me a lot of good. I discovered that he was dating some big-breasted girl from where he worked, so in the end, it was me who left him. Not exactly the story I heard from Wendy, but close enough. It's better without him, I whispered in her ear, lightly licking it. Jill shuddered and pressed herself even closer to me. She felt so good in my arms, so tiny, so slender, so vulnerable, so feminine, so damn beautiful. What else did Wendy tell you about me, Greg? Jill asked, the nervousness in her voice very obvious. Nothing special, I lied back to her. Little white lies don't hurt anyone, and I might save this discussion for a later time. We kissed again, this time with more passion. So you didn't answer my question, Greg. What was that question, Jill? I said. Are we going on a date again or not? She repeated. Definitely, I replied. And I also know what we're going to do. Oh yes? What is it? She asked. We're going shopping, I told her. We go shopping on Saturday morning? Jill expressed her surprise, but I wasn't interested in elaborating. I think she guessed something but didn't show it. We continued to kiss and hug each other, and I became more and more convinced that this girl would occupy a prominent place in my life. This is so nice, she said quietly. This girl, according to Wendy, who had been acting approachable for months, had probably never actually enjoyed breast caresses until now. Then I realized I knew the way to this girl's heart. I finished unbuttoning her blouse, gently pushing aside her weak attempts to stop me, and with increasing arousal, I pushed it aside. An advantage for girls with small breasts, as I suspected, was that there was no bra, and she didn't need one. They were so strong and elastic. Wonderful, I thought about it and said out loud, catching a glimpse of a smile flashing across her sweet face. They're so small, Jill protested again, but this time her tone was different. Now she was looking for reassurance and wanted me to tell her again that I thought they were beautiful. Beautiful things come in small packages, I told her smoothly. And they are the most beautiful, soft little packages I've ever seen. I'm not entirely sure I was being completely honest because, although I prefer small breasts and always have, I have met a few in my time. However, they really were almost perfect and reminded me of some of the young girls I had met years ago. That only added to their appeal, and as far as I was concerned, I was fascinated. "Are you okay, Jill?" I asked her tenderly a few minutes later as she lay in my arms, still trembling from time to time. Jill simply nodded, unable to even open her eyes at the moment. So this is what satisfaction really is, she surprised me a few minutes later. Sometimes I wondered if I would ever know. Wow, now I knew that she could really be mine, I thought, the first guy to please a girl and all that. Jill looked at me with the most wonderful smile, somewhere between hot and adoring. "Do something for me, please, dear," she asked. "Certainly, whatever you want, honey." "I think I can handle that, Jill," I confirmed. "But if I cry, please just ignore me," Jill muttered shyly. "In fact, I'm so happy I'll probably cry." "Don't mind it, just keep going." Yes, I could understand why she was crying with happiness. "Thank you, Greg," Jill said to me a little later, smiling and looking me straight in the eyes, which were shining with the tears she had shed. "Thanks, Jill," I replied. "You are such a beautiful girl." "I love you, at least that's what I think," she whispered. Our next date took place as I had planned. On Saturday morning, I picked her up in my car and drove us both into town. "What are we going shopping for, Greg?" she asked, leaning against me. "You'll see," I replied. "I hope it's nothing for me," Jill continued. "I do not need anything." I glanced at her. She didn't say anything, but the small smile on her face showed that she had her suspicions. She was right, but I think she would never have guessed how much this shopping trip would change her young life. "So, Jill," I asked her, holding the dress I had selected from the rack, "how about this?" "No way," she answered me, laughing. "I could never wear this. It's too short. It looks more like a t-shirt than a dress." "Okay," I agreed, tossing it over my arm with the other one she had already rejected. "This dress is beautiful, Greg." "Okay, give it to me," I sort of agreed, taking it from her, then returned it to the hanger when she turned away. "Too long, too old-fashioned." "How many dresses do we have to try on now, dear?" Jill asked. "I'm only allowed to take a maximum of 5 into the fitting room." "We have 6, I told her. "I'll put that green one aside." Without waiting for her consent, I took the green one from her hand and put it on the nearest hanger. "Too bad," Jill commented. I really liked it. She didn't know that it was the only dress she chose that I didn't put aside when she wasn't looking. We headed to the fitting rooms, which in itself took some time. You know how it is. Guys would just head straight there, get down to business, and move forward. But not women. Oh no, they have to stop and look at everything that catches their attention, regardless of the fact that we were already looking at all these things 10 minutes ago. Anyway, the fitting rooms were those big communal ones where a woman leaves her husband or boyfriend outside and disappears inside to emerge, if you're lucky, in something for you to appreciate. I was hoping for something more personal, where I could be a little cheeky and take a peek inside, but luck wasn't on my side. I waited. I waited a little longer. Then I waited some more. Finally, the saleswoman came over, looked at me, and asked if I was the guy with the beautiful blonde with long legs. Yes, I replied. What is she doing there? She wants to know where all the dresses she chose are, she replied. Oh, what's wrong with the ones she has? I asked. She says they're all too short, the saleswoman replied. Crap. What do you think? I asked the young girl, noticing in passing that she was quite pretty. "I think she looks great," she replied. "I would kill for legs like hers." "Did you tell her that?" "No, there was no chance. I thought about the situation. If I don't at least get Jill to come out and show me the dresses, this whole outing could end in disaster." "Can you persuade her to wear one of these dresses?" I offered. "Anyone in particular?" the girl asked, her interest suddenly increasing. "There was one, in fact, but I didn't want to tempt fate, so I said no." I went back to waiting, crossing my fingers. Indeed, after 5 minutes, the girl came out, winked at me, and stepped aside. It was a moment, a defining moment. As is usually the case, it didn't start off well as Jill's head appeared around the corner of the opening, peeking out trying to find me. I hoped she would come out straight, like any man whose blood boils at the thought of his girl being admired by other guys. But no, Jill hissed at me again and again until I couldn't ignore it any longer. "What's happened?" I asked innocently as I approached her. "You creep, Greg," she told me. "Where are the dresses I chose?" "They weren't suitable," I explained logically. "And do you think these are suitable?" Jill countered. "Logic just doesn't work with women, does it?" "I don't know until I see them, honey," I replied. It seemed like a pretty good idea. "Well, I'm not going to come out here in this dress for everyone to see," Jill stated with dignity. "Why not?" "It's too damn short, Greg," she countered, pain etched into her pretty face. "If I bend over, everyone will see my panties." "Well then, don't bend over," I suggested logically, but it came to nothing, and she still didn't come out. In the end, with the help of an assistant, we persuaded Jill to at least stand in the opening so that I could see her. The situation looked more promising, but she stood all hunched over, arms crossed over herself, afraid to show herself properly. "Stand up straight, Jill," I ordered her. "No, please, no." "Come on, Jill." "No." I gave her my most gracious look and silently said, "Please," with my lips. "Oh, damn you," Jill sighed and took a deep breath. She straightened up and dropped her arms to her sides. Wow. It was short. Damn short by any standard. The dress was black with a small, and I emphasized small, pleated skirt that flared out from the hips. The top hugged her figure, and even with her small breasts, it was quite obvious to anyone looking that she wasn't wearing a bra underneath. "I told you it was too short," Jill said. "Yeah, a little short," I admitted, "but it looks fantastic on you. Your legs too, well, they're just gorgeous." "It really does," the saleswoman agreed. "With legs like these, you should always wear dresses like this." "I think so too," said a deep voice to my left. Jill's mouth fell open in surprise when she realized that a couple of onlookers had crept closer to take a sneak peek. "Great," another guy commented. "I wish my wife had legs like these, honey." "Oh God," Jill exclaimed, but held her position stoically, even making a small twirling gesture to show us the dress. Well, do I look okay in it?" "Fantastic," we all said in unison. Jill smiled with embarrassment, but her joy was obvious. "Should I try something different?" she asked nervously. Damn, success was so sweet. Over the next 20 minutes, Jill tried on the 5 dresses we had chosen, gaining more confidence each time. When she put on her 5th dress, she walked out like a model on a runway, a little surprised by the small crowd of people, and not just men, who appeared out of nowhere to admire her, especially those magnificent legs. She listened to a few comments, blushed like a lobster, ran up to me, kissed me, and rushed back to the fitting room. In the end, we took 2 dresses, including the black one which, by the way, was really a little short, but it was her decision. Honestly, I wouldn't argue. We also bought 2 pairs of skinny jeans. She really looked good in them. Did I mention this before? 2 skirts, one tight, the other not, but both, of course, short. 3 new tops that she would never dream of wearing before. Oh yes, and 2 t-shirts, white, tight, and short. God, they looked so good with her new jeans. Just like that, she left the store wearing tight jeans and a t-shirt that looked like it was sprayed on, her cute little breasts proudly on display. Intimacy. I myself could not believe the changes in her. "They're looking at me, Greg," she worried. "They must think I look terrible." "They're looking at you, Jill," I confirmed with delight, "and they think you look cute as hell." "Don't be stupid, Greg," Jill replied, but if anything, she stuck out her small chest even more and almost walked along the road barely holding back a smile. I wonder if she had realized how little that t-shirt left to the imagination if she would have been so confident, but she must have checked herself out in the mirror that night. Those 2 t-shirts and skinny jeans became her go-to outfit for the next few months and beyond. The next stop was a shoe store where Jill began with the usual objections that she couldn't wear this and wouldn't be able to walk in that. But again, with the help of a salesman, this time a man who seemed to be enjoying himself, we convinced Jill to finally try on a pair of black, simple, not too tall heels. She was a little wobbly at first, having never worn heels before, but the salesman told her that she would soon get used to it, and indeed, she quickly adapted. We put this pair aside, and the seller suggested red ones, much higher than the black ones. "They are beautiful," Jill admired, "but I wouldn't be able to walk in them. I would fall, and people would laugh at me." But the smile of anticipation on her sweet face told me that convincing her would be easier than with dresses. "Okay," she gave in after a few minutes. "I'll try them on, but we won't buy them." Our friendly salesperson even gave her some tips on how to walk in high heels. "Put one foot in front of the other," he told her, smiling. "What do you think I'm doing?" Jill laughed in response, already drawn into the process. "I go forward, not backward." "No, miss," he chuckled in response. "I mean when you put your foot in front, you circle it around and put it right in front of the other. You know, like a model on a runway." "Damn stupid," Jill commented. But she tried it anyway, and after a few minutes, although a little hesitantly, she walked confidently back and forth, her bottom swaying so nicely in her tight jeans that the salesman and I, who were watching her perform, smiled stupidly at each other. "Gorgeous legs," the seller commented. I agreed with a nod. "Nice 5th place," he added as she sauntered away from us. Again, I agreed. "Nice little pair of breasts, if you don't mind me mentioning," he continued without any noticeable embarrassment. As Jill turned towards us, every detail of her chest was clearly visible through her thin t-shirt, indicating she was aware we were talking about her. She looked so damn nicely in those tight jeans and a t-shirt with those high heels. "Yes indeed," I agreed again, "you're lucky, buddy." He finally ventured, I nodded again. "Yes, I am like this." And it was 15 minutes later we happily walked out of the shoe store, hot red high heels in our bag, black strappy ones on our feet, and huge smiles on our faces. I doubt we passed a single male member that afternoon whose eyes did not turn to follow us as we passed. I've never been the jealous type, and that was for the best. The transformation into Jill was almost incredible. She had a few uncertain moments in the first few days, especially as she worked up the courage to return to work with a new look. She did this carefully, which was a good idea, high heels on the first day, tight jeans after a couple of days, and the full effect by the end of the week. "I was talked to 6 times today," Jill told me proudly the following Friday night, laughing when she saw my slightly fallen face. "Don't worry, Greg, you're my man and I owe you everything. You're the only guy I want to be with." Funnily enough, we got engaged within 3 months, and by Christmas, we were Mr. and Mrs. Greg Howard. "You can't imagine how happy I feel," Jill told me as we walked arm in arm from the registry office. I looked closely at my beautiful, nicely, elegant wife. There was no doubt in my mind which of us was the lucky one. That shoe salesman was right, as far as I could tell. For the next few years, we both suffered greatly from this damn disease called blissful marriage syndrome. It was really strong for us. Life couldn't have been better for both of us as we gradually advanced in our careers and our love matured and grew. I was, and still am, a fairly attractive guy, dressed well, had a nice car, was outgoing, got along with people, and was quite good in bed. Jill's words, not mine. Jill, on the other hand, seemed to have blossomed even more from her cocoon and transformed from a sweet girl into a beautiful young woman. She got along with everyone, and everyone seemed to love her. My parents definitely accepted her, and sometimes it seemed like I became almost an afterthought in their eyes. But this didn't bother me at all because, in my eyes, Jill was almost perfect. Her sense of style has improved exponentially. For everyday wear, her skirt length is a little longer than those first few exciting dresses we bought, still mostly short to highlight those gorgeous legs, but more refined and sophisticated. It was only when we went to parties or something special that her skirt length would rise to an almost legal limit. And when she wore tight jeans and high heels, well, I've already talked about it. Sorry, but it still gave me chest pains just talking about it. Oh, and those t-shirts, no, sorry, we've already discussed this, haven't we? However, Jill without a bra and a t-shirt, damn it, I loved watching other men's reactions when she walked into the room wearing a short skirt, long, slender legs, and good high heels. And even better when she walked straight towards me and gave me a kiss on the cheek. Oh, jealousy, envy, I could feel it, I could practically see it. Jill was my prize, and I adored her in the way she dressed. It wasn't just her legs that she used, she had learned to look at guys quite flirtatiously, almost blinking her eyelids at them. And all okay, she flirted with guys a lot, it was hard for her not to since they were constantly harassing her. But she had a way of just disarming them without hurting them. Yes, I'd love to go to dinner with you, Tom, was typical. I'll ask my husband when we're free. Yes, it entertained me, and her stories of how creative some of her fans were made us laugh until we cried as she talked about her day. As we lay cuddled in bed. And then, of course, there were her breasts. Jill went from hating them to loving them when she realized that not all men only love big breasts. She became quite comfortable showing them off in appropriate circumstances, such as on the beach where she always immediately bared her top. I liked it. No, really, no touching, of course, but what confident husband wouldn't enjoy the occasional glimpse of his wife's breasts? I accused her with pleasure as I approached her at my company's office party. My boss spent half the evening trying to get around you to get a look at your top. I know, she replied with a giggle. And that doesn't bother you? I asked, deciding to clarify if it was unpleasant for her that he did this. Of course not, dear, she replied. I moved around so he could see better. Naughty cow, I repeated, with passing irritation. Show me what you showed him, Jill agreed and leaned forward a little, turning her side to me. Damn it, I see everything, Jill, I breathed. I can see your whole chest. Jill laughed. Well, maybe he'll give you a promotion then, honey. He's the one who most likely got the promotion, I replied back to her. Well, I did get a raise, but only after a few months, so I like to think it was because of my abilities and not just because of my wife's breasts, I admitted. Although I must admit that my boss often asked how my charming wife was doing, and that is, we rarely missed the guest list when a company event was announced, Jill interrupted, and life continued the same way for a couple more years. We both enjoyed the occasional glimpse Jill would give a random guy of her breasts under her top or a glimpse under her short skirt, nothing too revealing, nothing too risky. If any of the guys suspected that we were doing this intentionally and together, they never talked about it. Then everything changed. This changed when I discovered that Jill and I may not have sung from the same opera. You got a little too close with Mike on the dance floor, I casually accused her one night when we were out with friends. No more than usual, dear, she replied, holding the hand of the next guy in line waiting for his turn. I watched them as they danced to some modern tune, Jill swaying intimacy a meter away from Ted, her new partner. I was all too aware that he was looking at the gap between her half-open blouse, which opened and closed as she moved. Normally I would have grinned at such a sight, but I was a little surprised by what I thought I saw her doing with a little earlier, and especially by her flippant response when I mentioned it. Then the music changed as if on cue, and Ted took Jill into his arms and pulled her closer. I felt uncomfortable for the first time. I felt uncomfortable with the way Jill acted. It didn't bother me that they were watching, I even liked it, but I wasn't all that comfortable with any kind of touch, and I was absolutely sure that Mike had touched Jill's breasts while they were dancing. Then Ted did the damn same thing. I watched with bated breath as he lifted his hand up, sliding it between them until it disappeared between their bodies. That man touched her. He played with her right breast, and Jill did nothing to stop him. Damn it, this blouse was so thin that it was almost as if he was caressing her bare breasts. I fought the temptation to jump up and separate them as I continued to sit there, squirming in my chair, more and more irritated by their actions, my insides seething and sweat gathering uncomfortably on my forehead. "Hey honey," Jill greeted me as she happily returned from the dance floor, not at all bothered by the fact that I had seen her give Ted a quick kiss as they parted ways. "I promised Mike one more dance. Greg, will that be okay?" "No, this is not normal at all, Jill," I exploded, my irritation more than obvious. "What happened, dear?" she asked quietly, a look of concern on her face. "Do you want the next dance?" "That's not the point, Jill," I answered a little more quietly, aware that our friends were around. "Then what's the matter, Greg?" she demanded, her voice still honeyed as she sat on my lap, hugging me. "What are you doing, Jill?" I told her, trying to keep my voice low. "First with Mike, and now with that damn Ted." I never really had much patience for Ted, unlike us more sensible guys, the fool supported Manchester United. "What dancing with them?" Jill asked, still pretending not to understand. "Not dancing with them, Jill," I said, "letting them touch you like that." "Like this?" she asked, seemingly genuinely puzzled. "Letting them touch your breasts, Jill?" I blurted out, displeased. "Don't try to deny it, I saw it." "Oh, this?" "Yes, that Jill," I continued, taken aback by her nonchalant. "What the hell were you thinking, Jill?" She hesitated for a few moments, looking at me uncertainly. "I just let them touch a little, Greg," she finally whispered. "And you think this is acceptable behavior, Jill?" "Well, yeah, Greg, I thought you were okay with it." "Why the hell did you think it would be okay for me, Jill?" I raised my voice more than I would have liked. "Listen, Greg," my wife said, taking my hand and pulling me to the side where the others couldn't hear us. "We'd better discuss this away from prying ears." I followed her into the corner, half-hearted, my mind in a storm, and my inner feelings boiling. What the hell was my wife thinking? "So what is this about, Greg?" Jill stood demandingly in front of me, with a stern look on her otherwise beautiful face. "What's the big deal with me letting a couple of your friends touch my breasts a little? I swear, they were just my breasts, and I didn't let them put their hands under my clothes. What's so special about tonight?" I stood there stunned, barely understanding the meaning of the words she had just spoken. "Well, Greg," she nudged me when I didn't answer. "Why am I suddenly wrong just because Mike and Ted got a chance to feel? It's not the first time, and you've never complained before." "Not the first time?" I asked, barely able to get the words out. "Of course not, Greg, and you know it," she said, starting to get angry. "You know our deal. Damn it, as long as you're around, I'm fine with letting guys feel my breasts a little if I feel like it. I know it turns you on, and I don't do that unless you're around, ever. What's the deal, Jill?" God, even I felt pathetic, I admitted, my face falling. "Come on, Greg," Jill said as if reprimanding a small child. "You'll be telling me you didn't put your hand under Annie's blouse next." "Annie's blouse?" I screamed in confusion. What the hell does Annie's blouse have to do with this? "For Christmas," Jill blurted out at me, at Fred and Nicole's party. "Don't deny it, Greg." "Oh. How did she know about this?" Even I barely remembered it in the state I was in that night. "I forgot about that," I admitted. "It didn't mean anything. I was drunk." "How did you know?" she told me. "Greg," Jill replied. "You know what she said. We discussed it." "Did we discuss? You know what we discussed, Greg?" Jill continued sharply. "That's when we came to our little agreement. You can touch our friends' breasts if they let you, of course, and I'll do the same with guys, but only when we're both close, and that's where it stops." "We agreed." "Yes, we agreed," I asked, not having the slightest memory of this conversation. "When did I agree to all this?" "That night, Greg," Jill explained to me, her face taking on a pained look, beginning to realize I wasn't kidding. "When we got home and got into bed, we talked about it. Greg, don't you remember how you told me you always wanted to feel Nicole's breasts?" I didn't remember anything like that, but the fact remained a fact. I've always dreamed of touching our neighbor Nicole's beautiful breasts, and I highly doubt I ever shared this information with my wife. "I was drunk that night, Jill," I reminded my wife. "I know, darling. I almost had to carry you home." But you have to remember, she insisted. Not a word? Oh, it was a word I didn't hear my wife say very often. We stood pondering what we had just discovered, both lost in our thoughts. It's mid-February, Jill, I pointed out unhappily. That means for the last 6 weeks or so, you've been, you know? Jill nodded. Who? I demanded. How many of them? Don't ask, she answered quietly. Quite a lot, dear. I'm sorry, my friends, most of them from time to time, Jill confirmed sullenly. There was another long pause. And you don't? I left the sentence unfinished. Never, I confirmed. Not with one of them. Except for Annie, at Christmas. My wife suggested. Well, apparently so, I confirmed. But I didn't even put my hand under her blouse. That I remember. I can't even remember what they felt like. And you never noticed me before this evening, Greg? Not at all, I admitted, dissatisfied. But I asked you if everything was okay a couple of weeks ago, Greg, Jill continued. You said everything was fine. And then when I asked how you were doing, you said yes. When was this, Jill? The night we went to the club with Mara and her gang. You were fiddling with the computer when I came down. I wore my new blue dress for the first time, the one with no back. Oh yes, a blue dress without a back. I remember that night well because I felt a little awkward seeing how some of the guys Jill was dancing with were running their hands over her bare back. Well, apparently my fears were in vain, since apparently they ran their hands along her front, too. When you asked me if I was okay, Jill, I thought you meant if I was ready to go, I explained to her. And when you asked how I was doing, I thought you were asking about the computer game I was playing when you came down. A computer game, yes, Jill, a computer game, I repeated. So you didn't mean that you had a good time with one of our friends' wives, Greg? No, Jill, I didn't mean it, I repeated. Oh, my wife repeated again, covering her face with her hands. I'm sorry, darling. Oh damn, I'm really sorry. So what should we do now? After some thought, somehow the thought of a few of my friends accidentally touching Jill didn't seem like the end of the world. Of course, I wasn't thrilled about it, but it wasn't reason enough to ruin a good marriage, and Jill seemed genuinely upset that she had misunderstood me. I guess I should give you the rest of the evening, Greg, Jill eventually suggested. Well, that seemed like a pretty fair offer, but let's put it into perspective, okay? Here I am, Greg, on the cusp of 30, a fairly attractive guy. My goal then was to touch as many girls' breasts as possible that evening. The chances, let's be honest, were pretty limited. The results, aside from one punch to the face, were one quick touch to a woman I didn't even like in another corner. This is Jill, mid-20s, slim, and absolutely stunning legs hard to look away from, and lovely small breasts beautifully and, as always, artfully displayed. The chances were almost limitless. The results, I don't even want to think about it. God, how miserable I was by the end of that evening. It doesn't work, does it, Greg? Jill remarked as we drove home from a party at dawn. Not for me, Jill, I sighed aloud. What about you? No problem with someone touching my breasts whenever I want? No problem, Greg, she replied thoughtfully. What time is it tonight? Too much, dear, she replied instantly. And it's not as fun anymore, knowing that you're not having fun. I'm not having fun, Jill. Maybe we should stop then, Greg. Can we, please? Of course we can, Greg, Jill told me. I've never been particularly happy with all your friends groping me anyway. Thank you, Jill. We hugged each other and kissed a lover's kiss, eventually catching our breath after a while. Can I still wear nicely tops and things, Greg? Jill asked. I nodded in agreement. And show off your breasts a little, like before? I hope so, Jill, I replied. I really hope so, darling. Jill kept her word. I really do believe this. And over the next few weeks, I noticed more than one so-called boyfriend looking upset as Jill kept them at a distance. Yes, everything was fine again. I couldn't help but notice from time to time that Jill allowed her breasts to be touched by all these guys, but I guess she was just making up for not having as much fun as most girls in their teens. Let's be honest, the thought of my wife with other guys was a little exciting. In the end, it was only her breasts that were in play, and by then, I'm pretty sure they had all long since gotten a good look at them, considering the pretty outfits Jill wore all the time. No problem, even a little exciting, actually. The problem may have been that I didn't realize that Jill had figured it out. We lay in bed together one Saturday morning with nothing better to do. As I sometimes like to do at such moments, I mindlessly caressed her breasts. Nothing too hot, not in the depths of some passion, just casually playing with one of them while we discussed the room we were planning to paint soon. Have you ever imagined someone else doing this, Greg? Jill asked during the conversation. What do you mean? Have I ever thought about some other guy doing this, honey? I almost repeated. Some guy paints our room for us, I laughed in response. That would be great, Jill. We can barely afford paint after buying your new car. Not a room, you idiot. My breasts, what some guy is painting your breasts, Jill laughed at me. I laughed in response, knowing full well what she was getting at. What color would you paint them, idiot? Laughed Jill, smiling at me. You know exactly what I'm talking about, Greg. Have you ever thought about how some other guy would touch me, grope me? Never, I lied, despite the risk that she might let it fade because she didn't make a promise either. My mind often strayed from this path. I don't believe you, Jill, she said, looking me straight in the eyes. Why should I lie? Why should I think about some other man doing this to you? I objected. Because it turns you on, honey. This doesn't do any of the things it's supposed to do, I countered. Oh, yes, it is, darling, my wife sang. This is wrong. You're thinking about it now, aren't you, Greg? Jill stated, giggling slightly. Don't deny it. You're thinking about it now, aren't you? Well, of course, now that you mention it, I had to admit but refused to admit that the thought actually turned me on a lot for some reason that I couldn't quite get my head around. And that turns you on, doesn't it? No, of course not, I denied, trying to keep a straight face. Then why? Oh, why is this little guy so big, honey? Jill asked in her girly voice. Of course, it wasn't easy. And despite some rambunctiousness, Jill continued to tease me, demanding to know who I thought was playing with her breasts, where and when, and would I watch? Would there be more than one at a time? And would I join? All questions I really didn't want to answer. Damn it, I hardly wanted to admit to myself some of the fantasies I enjoyed in private. Perhaps we should talk about this another time, Greg, she said finally. With that, I grabbed her, and we began a wonderful love affair that took up most of the morning. It was good, truly exceptional. And I somehow realized that I had not yet heard the last topic of our conversation. Have you thought about it yet, dear? Accidentally slipped into our conversation a couple of days later. About what, Jill? I asked, although from the expression on her face, I immediately knew exactly what she was talking about. Honestly, I was waiting for this, and she didn't give me the opportunity to avoid it. You know what I'm talking about, Greg, and I know you must have been thinking about it, Jill began her explanation. I know it turns you on, and you know I like it. But I feel bad thinking about my buddies touching you, I complained. Imagine the consequences if one of their wives gets upset about this. You're right, Greg, she agreed with me. I always felt a little awkward when your buddies groped you. But what about someone we don't know? No, Jill, I said hesitantly. I just don't want you letting other guys touch you like that. Why not? She asked. It's just wrong, Jill, I explained. It's not that I'm jealous, it just doesn't feel right. Just a little harmless fun, she giggled, and despite myself, I couldn't help but smile back. Why do you need this, dear? I asked her. It always seems so much more exciting afterward, she replied vaguely. We'll see how it goes. We left it at that, and later she dragged me to bed early, and we did just about everything that was possible for two young people of the opposite intim who were passionately in love. No questions. The fantasy of Jill being touched was even more exciting for both of us than just talking about it. The problem, as I had already discovered, was that the distinction between fact and fiction seemed blurrier to Jill than it was to me. It was a Friday night, and Jill and I had a nice dinner at a local hotel that had the best restaurant in town. Of course, it was expensive, but Jill got the chance to dress up, and things between us were, if not better than ever, we were both still crazy about each other. "I don't want to go home yet, dear. Maybe we can have a drink at the bar," my wife suggested. I didn't mind, of course, and I rarely missed an opportunity to show off the beautiful Jill when other guys were around. That evening, she wore a short blue dress, the one that had no back and by and large not much in the front. We had recently returned from a short holiday in Spain, and she still had a beautiful golden tan, and despite the shortness of her dress, not a single tan line was visible. And I'll leave you to guess why I was so proud of her. Oh, how proud I was. Damn, I was so proud it was almost painful. We both sat down on stools at the bar, and Jill crossed her long legs as usual, causing her short skirt to ride up even higher, exposing her beautiful tan thighs. The bartender gave her a good look when he served us, trying not to be too obvious, but he was doing a pretty bad job. He wasn't sure where to look, at her legs or at the slit in her dress that went all the way down to her navel. There were a lot of legs visible, but I think the slit won out, and after spending the evening opposite it, I could understand why. "Naughty girl," I accused her when he walked away. "I'm just doing this for you, darling," she replied, and we both laughed. "Okay," I declared, finishing the rest of my cognac in one gulp. "Finish your drink, honey, because when I get back from the bathroom, I'm going to take you home and have some good night with you." "Promises, promises," Jill giggled in response. "It seems like we've never been happier." I didn't exactly run or anything, but I went to the men's room, relieved myself, and came back a little surprised to find that Jill wasn't alone anymore. I had only been gone for 5 minutes, but standing next to her, leaning on the bar, was a well-dressed stranger deep in conversation with her. After the initial shock, I realized that any girl left alone as beautiful as Jill would probably be a target in a bar like this, especially one showing as much flesh as she did. I confidently stepped forward, smiling all over my face, ready to hug her waist and show this guy whose girlfriend she really was. "No, my husband is on a business trip at the moment," I heard her say. "I'm here with a colleague who works for me, and we just finished our meeting." Sorry, what did I hear correctly? Did I work for her? What nonsense was Jill telling the stranger? Needless to say, I changed my immediate plans and slowed down, unsure of what to do. "How about you go to the club with me?" the stranger asked Jill, apparently already recognizing her name. "Sorry, Daniel," Jill replied, leaning toward him and no doubt intentionally giving him a long, unobstructed look through the slit of her dress. "I can't just walk away and leave Greg, okay?" Daniel agreed. "Maybe we can leave a little later, maybe, Daniel," Jill teased. "Let's see." It was time to intervene, I thought. "Well, Jill," I greeted her, trying to wrap my arms around her waist. "Who did you find here?" "Ah, there you are, Greg," Jill replied, deftly moving my hand from her waist to the bar. "This is Daniel." "Daniel, meet Greg." We shook hands a little awkwardly, both sizing each other up. He was probably thinking about how to get rid of me quickly, likely assuming I was trying to protect my charming female boss from a predator. In reality, of course, he was not so far from the truth. "Nice to meet you, Greg," he greeted me. "You're lucky to have such a beautiful boss like Jill here." I glanced at Jill, and she blushed with embarrassment, probably already regretting her little trick. "Yes, Daniel," I replied. "Sometimes it's such a pleasure to work under her." Jill coughed, almost choking, and Daniel looked at us, trying to understand what was happening. "Daniel is here to look at the company he's thinking of buying, Greg," my lovely wife kindly informed me, making me feel even less important. Even in real life, I couldn't compare to this so-called assistant. I felt the first twinges of humiliation. "Greg," Daniel said, "could you come and take my jacket from that chair where I was sitting?" These situations riled my hair, and Jill saw mine rise. This idiot treated me like some lackey, humiliated me in front of my wife, my boss, anything. "Why don't we go over and sit there, boys?" Jill intervened, defusing the situation. "It will be more comfortable for all of us." Before I could explode, she pushed a couple of glasses into my hands and directed me to a booth that our new friend seemed to have just vacated. When I got there, I found myself on one side of my wife and the man on the other, not the order I would have chosen, but it could have been worse. After polite conversation, I sat there silently seething with anger, pushed into the background and practically not participating in the conversation. My anger grew. It was rare that I objected to any guy lucky enough to steal a glance at Jill's breasts, as you'd probably already gathered. But the way he leaned over her, no doubt openly enjoying the sight of her breasts, just pissed me off. Jill's rather obvious efforts to help him in his endeavor did not add to my joy either. I was on the verge of breaking down when I heard Jill asking her friend for another drink. For a moment, I honestly thought they were going to forget about me. When Daniel remembered and asked what I wanted to drink, Jill interrupted. "He'll drink soft drinks," she said. "He needs to take me home later." "Non-alcoholic is non-alcoholic, Daniel," she responded quickly, "but maybe he won't have to take you home." They both laughed. I winced. To hell with them, I had heard enough. But Jill squeezed my hand, letting me know that I needed to remain calm. I had long since lost my calm, but I controlled my anger, managing not to shout at them. "God, I'm so sorry, Greg," Jill exclaimed as soon as Daniel walked away. "It started out as a game, and I was just flirting with him. I expected to get rid of him as soon as you returned." "So get rid of him now, Jill," I told her. "I'm tired of him staring at your chest. So get rid of him and let's go home." "We can't, Greg," she replied. "He's ordering us drinks, so we can't just leave." "Then stop humiliating me in front of him, Jill," I said, "otherwise, I'll leave on my own." "Okay, Greg," Jill said, kissing me on the cheek. "I'll be careful. Let's just play with this for a bit." "Let's play?" "What do you mean?" "Come on, Greg," she giggled. "This could be fun. Let's see what happens." "What do you mean?" "What will happen?" "Well, he's quite cute," but at that moment, Daniel returned, and I fell silent. I wasn't happy, but at least Jill and I were on the same page again. "Here are our drinks," Daniel said, pouring them onto the table. "Gin and tonic for the lovely lady, vodka and Red Bull for me, and here's your Coke, Greg." "Thank you," I replied, and Jill remained silent. "What are you doing, Greg?" Daniel asked as he sat down, seemingly deciding he wasn't going to humiliate me. Tricky idiot. He understood everything, didn't he? Piss off the guy who works for her, and he can hardly get into her panties later, can he, tricky idiot? This and that, Daniel, this and that. You know I wasn't going to be appeased so easily. He smiled at me and leaned over to Jill to whisper something in her ear. I can't be sure, but I thought he said, "Can we get rid of this guy, Jill?" It made me angry, believe me. Jill laughed and snuggled closer to him. This made me even more angry. "Listen, you two," Daniel began after cuddling up to my wife. "Everything will be known tomorrow anyway, so why don't we celebrate?" "Celebrate? What?" I muttered sadly. I didn't feel like I had much to celebrate and was counting down the seconds until I would end the charade. This guy, Daniel, was a few years older than me, obviously much richer, and, I must admit, more worldly oriented. I felt quite embarrassed in front of him and was very uncomfortable with the way my wife was courting this idiot, I said. "I went to look at the company today, but I actually shook hands on the purchase deal. It's Vimold and Grimley, you know, W&G Limited. They're pretty famous around here." "Oh my holy ants, no." "Oh hell no, W&G, Jill muttered quietly, leaning back in her seat. "Oh, it's good," Daniel continued, not noticing our uneasiness in his excitement, and proceeded to give us some vague details about what fantastic things he hoped to do with his new acquisition. "Listen, I'll order champagne to celebrate," he exclaimed joyfully, standing up and heading to the bar. "God, Greg, what should we do?" my wife asked in panic. "You got us into this, Jill," I reminded her. "Yes, that's right. You probably already guessed it." Jill was a junior manager at G&W. It would almost be funny if it weren't so serious. "I'm going to lose my job, Greg," she pleaded. "Probably," I agreed angrily. Although of all the things I was afraid Daniel would do to Jill, getting fired wasn't at the top of my list. "But we won't be able to afford it, Greg," she continued. We can't pay the mortgage with just your salary. It's true, we're in real trouble. We'll just have to play by the rules, Greg, Jill whispered as Daniel returned to our table, interrupting our conversation. Leave it to me, darling. I'll get us out of this. Here we are, he announced joyfully, pouring champagne and deftly wrapping his arm around my wife's slender waist. Here's to a great deal today and perhaps an even more exciting night later. Jill smiled nervously at me as I tried to hide my irritation. Daniel poured the champagne and didn't even forget about me. We drank to his success that day, and then drank again. Unfortunately, we didn't stop there, and before I knew it, my head was spinning as I stared in bewilderment at the 3 empty bottles of champagne sitting on the table in front of us. I have to admit that Daniel was pleasant in conversation, as long as he kept his hands away from my wife's forbidden areas, and they both made sure I didn't feel left out of the conversation. Oh, Daniel, my confused brain caught up next to me, and I found myself giggling stupidly as I watched my wife kiss Daniel, sobbing quietly as his hand slipped into the deep V of her dress. Hey, stop it, you too, I think I said, but to no avail as they ignored me. I reached out to pull his hand away, but I caught her dress and heard it tear as I pulled. Look what you've done, Greg. Daniel laughed. What are we going to do with it? Maybe one of you will kiss her, my wife giggled, her eyes a little cloudy and her speech slightly slurred. Jill never drank heavily, and looking back, I should never have allowed this situation to develop. I stated drunkenly. But as I leaned forward, my hand missed the table, and I lost my balance, falling in a heap on the floor. To hell with them. To hell with both of them. Oh God, if only I could think clearly and my head would stop spinning. If only I could get back on my feet properly. I was able to lift myself more or less upright, amazed at how quickly the champagne worked. I pulled myself back onto the bench, blinking and breathing deeply, trying to sober up. My God, she got her way, didn't she? But somehow, all I could do was sit there and smile stupidly at them both. Stop it! I'm sorry, but you really need to stop it right now, I agreed, absolutely right. The problem is that I didn't say it. Looking up, I saw the manager on duty, who may have been called by the bartender, standing next to him, watching the scene. Sorry, he repeated, quieter this time, after Daniel and Jill returned to reality. You can't keep acting like that in a bar, sir. Okay, sorry, old chap, Daniel responded cheerfully, while Jill simply giggled, completely unfazed by the fact that 4 men were staring at her half-without clothes state, her dress sliding right down to her waist. You really need to cover yourself, miss, the manager told her, although he made no attempt to stop staring. Please change into something more private. What's wrong with my outfit? Giggled Jill, shaking her small breasts in front of the 2 hotel employees. It's not that. It's, well, we just can't. His voice trailed off as he lost track, stunned by the half-perfection of the woman stretched out before him. Okay, guys, Daniel took the initiative. Help us here, and we'll get out of your sight. They helped us up, spending more time helping Jill than me, even though I somehow ended up back on the floor, and then escorted the 3 of us out of the bar, Jill's dress more or less restored to its correct position. Who dares challenge me to walk through the lobby without a dress? Jill shouted, under the influence of alcohol, breaking free from the manager's grip. No, Jill! I shouted. I don't think this is a good idea, madam, the manager ordered. I dare you! Daniel laughed. Oh my gosh, look at that, the bartender remarked in surprise as Jill pulled her dress over her head and tossed it aside. All 4 of us stood stunned as my wife walked through the lobby, which was still full of hotel guests, except for her stilettos and tiny panties. Miss, please, the manager called out to her, coming to his senses and rushing after her, followed by Daniel and me. We caught up with her halfway through the lobby, where the manager tore off his jacket and threw it over her shoulders, trying to make her look decent, and led her into a hallway off to the side. Sir, he said sternly to Daniel, I know you are a guest here, sir, but this is unacceptable. Please make sure this lady doesn't show up at my hotel like this again. So sorry, buddy, Daniel chuckled. We'll take care of her. Even I couldn't help but smile like an idiot after what just happened. Drunk or not, Jill definitely outdid herself that night. Hey, Greg, Daniel said, why don't you go back and get her dress? She can't go anywhere dressed like that. Okay, Daniel, I replied, holding back a giggle. I'll just go and get it. In my drunken confusion, I headed the wrong way, and if the bartender hadn't appeared, looking rather smug with a piece of dress in his hands, I might never have found it. Looking for this? He asked. Oh, yeah, I giggled. My wife seems to have lost her dress. Your wife, sir, he clarified. I don't know what the manager will say, but as far as I know, you can come back here any time. I'll remember that, I said, sort of thanking him, trying to concentrate on getting the dress. A lovely pair of breasts, sir, he commented. Thank you, my man. Have a nice evening, then, sir, he finished, handing me the dress and turning to go back to the bar. What a friendly guy, I thought to myself. God, I must have been drunk. I paused for a moment as the room somehow magically spun around me. Then, when it had calmed down again, I headed back to where I had left Jill and Daniel. Couldn't find them. Not a trace. I wandered around for a few moments, ignoring the disdainful glances of the dwindling number of guests, until my very good friend, the manager, approached me again. I think it's time for you to leave, sir, he told me, taking my hand. But I need to find Jill, I tried to convince him, my head still spinning. I think the young lady is gone with her husband, sir, he replied, still pushing me towards the exit. But I'm her husband, I explained. In that case, he may have already taken her home for you, he continued, desperately trying to get rid of me. He doesn't know where we live, I objected. Then suddenly, I realized in a flash where this guy could take her. Which room is he in? I demanded. It's none of your business, sir. Of course, it's my business, I exclaimed excitedly. He's in his room with my damn wife. If she's there, she obviously went there of her own free will, he replied sharply, starting to drag me. Let me go, you an idiot. I screamed at him, pushing his hand away, only to find that two other guys in uniform had grabbed me. You leave now whether you like it or not, one of them, a big guy, shouted at me. Someone call the police. I screamed, trying to free myself. They kidnapped my wife. Well, this was my first serious mistake, not to mention the fact that I allowed myself to get drunk in the first place. The damn hotel must have had a direct line of communication because the next thing I knew, two police officers took the lead and dragged me out of the hotel, not wanting to listen to what I was trying to tell them. You're drunk, one of them shouted in my ear. Get in the taxi and go home. I don't want to go home, I muttered back to them. I want my wife. Go home now or we'll arrest you, another yelled. Get in the taxi. I don't need a damn taxi. I spat at them. I have my own damn car. I don't recommend this, sir, they warned me. And that's when I made my second big mistake of the evening. Yes, I know, damn stupid and all, but at least they arrested me for driving under the influence before I could drive away and get into an accident. The police cell was not a very comfortable place, especially when I was as irritated as I was. Then, sometime in the early morning hours, my cell phone rang. Surprised that I still had it, I looked, and it was Jill calling me about 5 hours after I last saw her in the hotel lobby. They must have had an intim for 5 damn hours until my dear wife deigned to notice that I was no longer around. To hell with her, I pressed the end call button and put the phone back in my pocket, trying to go back to sleep on the hard bed in the police cell. Not so simple. The police called my wife in the morning to tell her where I was, but there was no answer, so I told them to forget about it. If she's not interested, then I don't care. I had to take 2 buses and walk 2 miles to get home, but I was no more ready to face her than when I started my journey, especially when I saw the lights on in our house in the gathering dusk. Greg, honey, where have you been? Jill cried as I walked through the door, rushing towards me and hugging me. I was terrified, worried about you. How worried were you about me last night? I answered indifferently. Oh, honey, I'm so sorry about last night, but I was in a panic when I realized you weren't there anymore. I almost screamed at the whole hotel. Oh yeah? I challenged her. Then how is it that you only realized I was gone after 5 damn hours? 5 hours, she repeated doubtfully. It can't be, dear. It couldn't have taken that long. I have a recording of your call, Jill, I angrily told my dear wife. Your first call was more than 5 hours after I left you in the lobby. Does it sound like you were that worried about me? I don't understand, dear, she tried to find an explanation. Maybe. I mean, I woke up in Daniel's room and you weren't there. And how many times has you, by then, Jill? How much pleasure have you had? We weren't doing this, honey, I swear, she asserted, her eyes filling with tears. I woke up dizzy and couldn't find you. Where was your boyfriend, Daniel? He was fast asleep until I woke him up on my bed next to you, I guess, I accused her. Yes, I guess, dear, she admitted, looking down at the floor. But we didn't do anything, I swear to you. And what were you wearing, Jill? Not much, she whispered, a look of shame appearing on her face. But I still had my panties on, Greg. I looked at her, not knowing what to think or even knowing if she knew for sure what she had done last night. What time did you get back here, Jill? I asked her. Does it really matter, dear? Jill sobbed, the tears in her eyes becoming more visible. You came back to me, darling, and that's all that matters to me, I insisted, shaking her shoulders. What time is it, Jill? I pressed. What the hell time? I'm not sure, Greg, she muttered between sobs. Sometime after lunch. What difference does it make? I accused. You damn liar. The police called until almost noon and no one answered. You got home sometime after lunch, Jill, I almost screamed. What do the police have to do with this? Jill almost screamed back. Because I spent the night in a damn police cell, I shouted back, not wanting to give any further explanation. Now tell me the truth this time. What time did you get back? I'm not sure, Greg, she mumbled between sobs. Sometime after lunch. What difference does it make? I pressed again. The difference is what you've been doing all morning, Jill, I told her, trying to remain calm. Did you have a cozy breakfast with your lover, or did you spend the whole morning having a night with him, for all I know? Jill's face became even paler, the tan from our holiday in Spain failing to conceal it. Well, I insisted. Breakfast or night? Which was it? He bought me lunch, Jill whispered, almost inaudibly. Then he brought me here. So you're saying you were with him before lunch? I pushed. Well, yes, she admitted, twisting her hands. I couldn't reach you, so I knew you weren't home, and when he invited me to lunch, he bought me a beautiful dress. So you weren't worried about me then? Well, Greg, she began, looking at me pleadingly. You were supposed to go to the dentist this morning, so I assumed you were there. Oh, I forgot about it, I realized. Damn, this was the second time I'd missed an appointment, and I was in trouble. Please, Greg, please, she began to plead. I really love you. I was stupid last night, but nothing happened. So can't we just forget about it? What about your dear Danny, Jill? I demanded. You spent the night with him almost without anything, and you expect me to believe nothing happened? Nothing happened, I promise, she asserted, tears welling up in her eyes. So he didn't touch you? No, she admitted reluctantly. So what was it, then? I screamed, my anger flaring up again. I've already seen him groping your breasts and kissing them. All we did was cuddle a little and kiss a little, she confessed, her voice breaking. But not like us. And you let him touch your breasts, I assume, I retorted sarcastically. Yes, I allowed it, she admitted. But I didn't let him touch my panties. Great, I replied dryly. I'm really proud of you. What a wonderful wife I have. Oh, Greg, I'm sorry, she pleaded. I said I'm sorry. I don't know what came over me. I drank too much. I can only imagine what came over you, Jill, I shot back sharply. And I bet it was attached to that damn Daniel. No, Greg, please, Jill sobbed, then burst into loud crying, shaking violently as she pressed herself against me. What have I done, Greg? Oh my God, what have I done? I've ruined our marriage, Jill, I told her. That's what you've done." The conversation was clearly going nowhere, but I yelled at her, and she cried back for the next half hour or longer. Eventually, we calmed down, and I took my place in my favorite chair, rejecting her attempt to sit on my lap. "Why didn't you stop me, Greg?" she finally asked, having calmed down a little. "I was drunk out of my mind," I admitted. "Why didn't you stop me?" "I don't know, Jill," I told her honestly. "Maybe I was just as guilty as you. I should have intervened when you started talking about, again." When she finally came to me and climbed into my lap, I didn't push her away. I was too tired, too exhausted to resist. We sat there for the rest of the evening in silence, holding each other, not saying a word, both praying to God that last night wouldn't happen. I still didn't know for sure whether Jill had cheated on me last night, and I wasn't sure if she knew for sure either. We didn't go to bed that night, we just settled on the couch. Jill asked if we should go upstairs to bed, but it seemed like too much trouble. The next day passed in a blur, and the week that followed wasn't much better. Jill was absolutely furious with me when she discovered that I had lost my license for a year. But when she mentioned it, I just stared at her, and she soon went silent. I was like a robot, performing my functions at work, refusing to let my brain think about what happened or how I could deal with it. Perhaps I was making a mountain out of a molehill, I just didn't know. A quote comes to mind when I think back to that period: "If I don't confront it, maybe it doesn't exist. Maybe one day, she'll just disappear." I loved Jill with all my heart and soul, but I couldn't forget what happened that night. This couldn't go on for long, and Jill finally got me to talk one evening. "Greg," she said quietly, "we need to talk about this. We need to get over this." "I don't know if I can, Jill," I told her honestly. "You chose that man over me that night, and then you spent the evening without clothes with him and completely forgot about me." Jill covered her face with her hands and burst into tears. What is it about a woman's tears that breaks even the strongest man, especially when it's the woman you love? Nothing was decided for the long term, but for the first time since that damned, terrible night, we made love. That night, it wasn't exceptional, not even very good. Damn, it wasn't very good at all. But it didn't matter. It was a start, although we both had to see if we wanted to continue. Not her, you understand? A day passed, then a week, and finally, a full month. Nothing was really decided, but we were still together, still hoping, even though it seemed like the ultimate happiness had left our relationship. But we tried, not just me, but both of us. Then something happened that gave us both something to hold on to. Suddenly, Jill received a major promotion. This wasn't just any ordinary promotion, but a new job that took her to a new level of management. For the first time in our relationship, Jill was contributing almost as much income to our home as I was. It may seem unimportant, insignificant, but I knew this would be a turning point for Jill, and I felt it could be a turning point for our relationship. And so it was. The next 6 months were much better, almost as good as before. That is, until, well, I almost forgave her. I haven't forgotten, This is different, but everyone makes mistakes, and as they say, life goes on. Then came the Christmas party. My problem is Christmas parties. This was hers, of course, at WNLTD where she still worked. "I need to go, Greg," she insisted. "I just have to." "No problem," I assured her. I expected this. I cleared the date. "I'm really glad you're coming, Greg, but if you don't like it, then you don't have to." "Why shouldn't I like it?" I asked cheerfully. "Free drinks and everything, and a little dancing." "Okay, honey," she replied, but she was not happy. Something was wrong. Something happened. It took me 10 minutes of coaxing and teasing, but I finally figured it out. "Daniel will be there," Jill admitted. "He owns the company." "Honey," she continued, "I swear on my life I haven't seen him since that evening, but he will be there that evening." "Okay, Jill," I told her, acting more relaxed and calm than I actually felt. "He's there." "So what?" Jill shrugged, smiled, and grimaced. What was I supposed to think about this? He kind of hinted that he'd like me to support him a little during the evening, introduce him to the staff and stuff, act as a go-between, kind of like a hostess. We looked at each other for a few moments while I collected my thoughts. "You told me you haven't seen him, Jill," I exclaimed, upset. "Didn't even talk to him." "I haven't seen you, Greg," Jill exclaimed. "Well, I definitely haven't seen him or talked to him face to face since that night, but I work for him, dear. Dan was the one who promoted me to my current position. We correspond by email, fax, and I talk to him on the phone almost every day." Oh, Jesus, she had never mentioned this before. "Did you know, right, not Daniel, but Dan? Which choice should I go with her? Let her go alone? Demand that she stay home? What a damn choice. Whatever I say will be wrong." Okay, so we discussed this rationally. Not the slightest chance, of course, we discussed it, but the more we talked about it, the more we yelled at each other, the more I sulked, and the more Jill yelled. Who was wrong? It was her, of course, but still looking back, if I had the choice again, I don't know. And here we are, December 21st, 8 in the evening, and I was sitting in my favorite chair like a miserable person, waiting for my wife to emerge from our bedroom. I'm waiting for the love of my life to show her loving husband what she will wear for this very special evening, how she will be dressed for her date that night. Just like that, I didn't go with her. "Oh, Jesus, no, Jill, no," I stated as she appeared in front of me. "Not in this dress, honey, not in this one." "What do you care?" Jill blurted out at me. "You don't trust me, you don't support me, so don't you dare tell me what to wear." With these words, Jill, my wife, turned sharply and left the room, and the front door slammed behind her. I don't think I've ever seen her more beautiful. Finality. The dress she was wearing was one of the ones I had bought for her earlier that year, just before we started having our problems. The dress we promised ourselves we would keep for a special occasion, to say the least. It was, frankly, no problem if she was with me, but some special occasion, one to which her husband was not invited, that evening, no, not even the whole evening, just the beginning of it, before Jill left so abruptly. For me, all the progress we had made in the weeks, months since she left me was lost. What a fool I was. I sat at home, seething with anger, turning over the last words she said to me in my head, processing them in my head until they swirled around me. She left with that idiot and left me for the second time. Okay, I didn't know that for sure, but what else was I supposed to think? There was nothing else. Jill went out to spend the evening with the gorgeous Daniel, and I wasn't expecting there. Could I have been more understanding? Yes, of course. Could I have? Should I have? Maybe, perhaps. Jill was just trying to protect my feelings, my ego. Perhaps, perhaps not. Damn it, damn them. I don't know what time she got home, and I didn't care, okay, it was somewhere around 1:30 in the morning, but who's counting? "Hi, honey," she greeted me just before noon when Jill finally showed up for brunch. "What did you do last night, cutie? Did you have a good time?" I looked at her, staring, not believing my eyes. "What happened, Greg?" she asked. "Is she a fool? Is she completely stupid?" "So you slept with him last night, Jill?" I asked calmly enough, "or did you have an intimate with the entire male staff?" Jill recoiled in surprise, her mouth open. "What do you mean, Greg?" she exclaimed. "Why are you saying that?" "Cheating," I accused her, not caring whether it was true or not, losing my composure. "Why don't you go back to your lover?" "But, Greg," she began to protest. I "Shut up, you cow," I shouted at her. "Just get out and leave me alone." "But, Greg," she started again. "Go to hell," I interrupted her. Jill looked at me for a few moments, tears welling up in her eyes. "But, Greg, honey, I didn't do anything. Honey, I didn't." "Too late," I shouted at her. "I don't believe a word you say anymore." With these words, Jill burst into tears, turned sharply, and ran out of the room. 10 minutes later, I heard the front door slam as she left the house. It took me a good 5 minutes before I started cursing myself for being such a fool. The next few months were chaos, full of beer and cheap whiskey. I don't remember much of it, but at least I didn't feel much pain. But eventually, as always, reality set in. It was Mike, remember Mike, my friend who I caught groping my wife's breasts all those months ago? Now, it seemed unimportant in light of what had happened since then. Don't you think that's enough, Greg? I heard someone's voice as I leaned against the bar counter in some pub in the city. This was not my regular bar. They made it clear to me that, at least for now, I was not welcome there. I turned around, recognizing Mike through the alcoholic haze that surrounded me. Off, Mike, I think he expected it, and he insisted, eventually convincing me to go to McDonald's with him, promising that he would buy me a drink later. Well, I need to make some statements here. I don't like Big Macs. No, sorry, I didn't like them at all and still don't like them. But I may be one of the few people in the world whose life was saved by a Big Mac. This gave Mike time to get to me, talk to me, and tell me what a complete fool I'd been. I lost my job and didn't even know it. I just didn't show up for work so often that eventually I just stopped going and they stopped waiting for me. He never mentioned Jill, and I never asked him. He focused on me and listened as I poured my heart out to him. He then took me home to his house, where May, his wonderful wife, continued my treatment, both of them taking time out of their lives to help me rebuild mine. I really should go home, I told them after being with them for over a week. Maybe I left the gas open or something. I doubt it, Greg, Mike replied, smiling. Your apartment was repossessed a few weeks ago. Where did I live? I asked, not believing my ears. Bedrooms with friends before they kicked you out. Maybe in the park for one night more than once. Oh my God, how could I fall so low? You can stay here as long as you want, Greg, he suggested, and May nodded, confirming his words. Let's say 2 weeks, maximum, I countered. I owe you so much that I cannot depend on you forever. As long as it takes, Greg, May suggested. As long as it takes. What friends? With friends like that, it's hard to have enemies. Okay, well, you know what I mean. Any news about Jill? I had to ask. I didn't want to bring it up, but I was preparing for it and couldn't avoid it any longer, no matter how much I wanted to. Don't worry about her, Greg, Mike began, but May interrupted him, bringing in her feminine wisdom. He's got to find out sooner or later, Mike, May spoke up. Better from us now than from the bar one night. What? I demanded. What's wrong with her? Is she okay? Oh, damn, my heart was pounding, and despite everything, I still cared about her. She's fine, Greg, maybe even better than okay, May continued. She moved in with Daniel Murray, the one who bought W. Before I could say anything, Mike intervened. No more, from what I heard, May. He told us both, May continued, from what I heard. She left him and went to some big official almost twice her age. With the help of Mike and May, I got back on my feet and began to rebuild my life. It wasn't always easy, but back then, I was nothing special with no high expectations, so for the most part, it wasn't that hard. I dated women, but not many, always trying to compare the poor woman to Jill. By the way, about the big official, you've all probably heard of. He was closer to 3 of his ages than 2, and in any case, that didn't last long either. OK Magazine, The Sun, even the Times and the Telegraph and television. These were all the ways I could track the progress of my beloved wife. Yes, wife, as far as I know, we were still married. There was never a divorce. Cannes Film Festival with some aging rock star, and a few weeks later, Los Angeles, at some premiere starring a male heartthrob, Jill became a minor celebrity in her own right, a personal friend of Paris Hilton with whom she was often photographed. That photo that made all the headlines where Paris got out of the car and showed the world that she went out without underwear. Now the girl in the foreground was Jill, and I kind of doubt she was wearing panties. We were just moving in different worlds, and I tried my best to push all thoughts of her out of my head. It's not easy. If you read newspapers, it's even more difficult. If you watch television, even our local pubs were hard to avoid, as she was a self-made local girl. How many times have I heard some guy claim to have known her before she was famous, say he took her out on dates and slept with her when she was just a local girl? How many fights did I get into? How many of them did I lose? Their stories weren't even close to being true, but eventually, I learned to keep my thoughts to myself and not get involved. I was fine until I heard that old Peter Sti song, you know, the one that starts with "Where have you gone, my fair?" or something like that, and tells the story of a girl from the Italian slums. Not exactly Jill's story, but the similarities broke me, especially the mention of a topless swimsuit. Oh, I should explain about this. I was reading a magazine that I probably shouldn't have even opened. Okay, so I was becoming obsessed. There in the middle pages was Jill, yes, my Jill, on some floating villa of an Arabian prince somewhere in the Mediterranean, glass of wine in hand, tiny bikini on the bottom, and almost nothing on top. Her small, perky breasts stuck out pertly, teasing the group of smartly dressed men who surrounded her. She looked so vulnerable, and I wanted to protect her, but I couldn't. Those firm little breasts, those long, slender legs, that smile, it just tore me apart. I spent the night wondering which man or men she ended up in bed with. No, I didn't sleep much that night. I lived through my agony for the next 2 years. I'm not saying I haven't dated other women and gone to bed with some of them. I'm not saying I didn't have a good time. By that time, I was in my early 30s, maybe a little older. I had a well-paid job, my own apartment, and a nice car. Many of my friends, both new and old, thought I had a life like Riley's. Well, it was until I saw my wife again in newspapers or magazines or on television, at a party with this guy or that guy. And it didn't seem to matter as long as they were rich and famous. God, Jill was absolutely amazing, every guy's dream, and it was I who opened it, and she was mine, damn it, just mine. But I lost it, the stupid fool that I was. Then it got worse, by a mile. She got a small role in some nondescript film, filmed in some unknown place by an unknown director. The film was presented at the Cannes Film Festival and had some success. So, the so-called artistic photographs of my wife running without clothes on a beach somewhere were distributed everywhere. Jill became more famous, if somewhat of a minor celebrity. And then it got even worse. James Bond, yes, you know this guy, my Jill got the role of a Bond girl in the latest film. Okay, not the main girl, this role went to some famous French actress. But Jill played the role of some bimbo who attracted Bond's attention and spent most of the film until she was killed by the villains with practically no clothes. Only discreet camera work separated her role from what could otherwise be a light film for adults. And so it went. Jill became, if not a famous film actress, then a well-known celebrity approaching the so-called A-list. Where was I? Well, I had a good job and a Jaguar, but I didn't have what I really wanted. Up until that point, the evening had gone completely mediocre. No, let's be honest, the evening sucked. I had a date, a second date with this little blonde girl from the insurance company I was doing business with. Great breasts, nice fifth place, nose maybe a little big, but what can you do? It started out good, but we ran into her other group of friends, having a great time together. You know how it goes, don't you? I wasn't completely invested, hell, I barely even liked this woman at all. We joined the company, she left to dance, I sat, watched her, got angry, and left. Adieu, as they say in France. I went home in a very bad mood. Rubbish, 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 rubbish. Screw her, I thought. She left with that group of fools, and if she needs a ride home, then that's her problem. Rubbish, 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 rubbish. Damn it, crap, but I picked up the phone anyway. Hello? Off, I'm going to bed, seemed like a reasonable response to a girl who left me like that. You can imagine, no doubt I was a little touchy about these things when I thought I was being abandoned. Hi Greg, this is Dan. Daniel? What are you talking about? I didn't realize it right away. I didn't know any Daniels. Then it dawned on me. Daniel Murray? Yes, Greg, was the answer. This is Dan. Long time no see. The longer, the better, as far as I'm concerned, was my obvious answer. Come on, Greg, he continued amiably, what's the problem, buddy? You ruined my marriage, you an idiot, I accused him, feeling my anger growing despite my best efforts. Not me, Greg, came the answer. I was just a link in the chain. Chain, damn chain. What do you mean by that? Come on, Greg, Daniel continued calmly. That night, you have to understand, Greg, if you give a girl so much freedom, it will inevitably happen sooner or later. I took a deep breath. Several years had passed since then, but even so, his words hit me straight in the gut. 2 days later, we met in some pub. We had a pint of beer in front of us. He was paying, and we started our conversation. So, speak, Daniel, I began the conversation. What are we talking about? Oh, Jill, of course. What's wrong with her? Did she die or get AIDS or something like that? You don't really want this, Greg, Daniel inquired cautiously, cutting off the angry answer I reluctantly agreed. You still love her, don't you? He asked, and I shrugged, unable to deny but not willing to admit it either. The night we met, Greg, he began to explain. I can be a bit of a man when it comes to women, but that night was incredible, and I can't explain it. Jill is a beautiful woman, but I've had beautiful women before. Sometimes they're after me, sometimes they're after my money. Who cares? But Jill, she was different, incredible. There was something special that night, even though we were both too drunk to do anything about it. But that's what we couldn't get back afterwards when she lived with me after she left you. The night was fantastic, but there was always something else, Greg, someone else. That someone was you. What are you talking about? I demanded, noticing his assertion that nothing happened that memorable night. Stop talking in riddles. What I'm trying to tell you, Greg, is that she still loves you. That night was the worst mistake of her life, drank too much, whatever. No excuses, but she made a mistake. One mistake, but a terrible one. Then why did she leave for you at that Christmas party? I demanded. Why did she spend the night with you? She didn't, Greg asserted. I swear to you, Greg, Jill spent the entire evening introducing me to management and employees and saving me from them when I couldn't leave before midnight. I challenged. Yes, he replied. Jill left early, wanted to get back to you, Greg. The party went on until morning, and I ended up spending the night with friends. Oh, could this be true? Then why didn't she tell me about it? She may have said it, Greg, but you didn't listen. I wasn't in the mood to listen. No, Daniel sighed. Apparently, the next morning, you had a big fight and you kicked her out. She had nowhere to go, so I gladly took her in. Oh, damn. Oh, damn. So, what is next? We lived together for a while until a better offer came along, Daniel explained, the pain in his voice making it obvious that Jill had gotten to him the same way she had gotten to me. Alan waved his wealth at her, and she left you. You were unavailable, and I couldn't compete with him. I had no chance. Then there was that rock idol, movie actor, and even the damn minister of justice. What the hell did she see in him? And that American senator, I added. He got divorced because of her, yes, Daniel agreed, shaking his head and remaining silent for several minutes. But you were the only man she ever loved, Greg, and as a man, it's not easy for me to say that. What? Why do you think I asked you to meet today? Greg, Daniel asked urgently. Jill is the only woman for whom I am willing to go through this pain. I stood before him speechless, my past surfacing conflicting with my otherwise calm and relatively serene present. She wants to see you, Greg, Daniel told me almost formally. She wants me to arrange your meeting. God almighty. How about tomorrow, Greg? He pushed me. Jill flies in from Dubai at 11. Are you free tomorrow afternoon? Damn it. The next day, as I waited for Jill to show up at the hotel where we were to meet, I couldn't even begin to explain the feelings that came over me, love, hate, expectation, anxiety, disgust, and yes, longing. Despite everything, I couldn't wait to see what she looked like in person, now rather than in the photos I'd been hopelessly staring at for too long. Then she arrived, and I didn't even recognize her. Hi, Greg, the rather sloppily dressed, rather ordinary woman standing in front of me greeted me. How are you, dear? I looked up, taking a few minutes to realize it was her. Jill, I muttered. What the hell? Why are you dressed like that? Her appearance reminded me of those first months when I knew her, all in baggy jeans and shapeless sweaters. It's for incognito, honey, Jill explained to me. I'm too famous to wander around looking like me. We have photographers following us all the time, especially in this town where I'm from. Made sense. It actually made it easier to talk to her, preventing my thoughts from running to the wrong conclusions. What does this mean, Jill? Was my first question. Why now, after all this time? It's time we sorted out our lives, don't you think? What does it mean? Well, honey, we're still married, aren't we? She explained. You may have read that I dated Brad Pitt for a while, and now that he got his divorce, he asked me to marry him. Brad Pitt? I asked, incredulously. I honestly didn't expect the conversation to go in this direction. The American film actor? I didn't know, Jill said. Most people don't know, Greg, she confided in me, but that's the situation. There was one of our long pauses during which Jill gave me time for the news to sink in. So you want a divorce, Jill? I asked finally, trying to hide my deep disappointment at the real reason for our meeting. Yes, dear, Jill confirmed quietly. I really love Brad very much, and we work out so well. But there is another option, the one I would choose if I could, Jill whispered quietly, nervously. You and me, Greg. I'm sure if we tried, we could do it. I jumped to my feet, my mind in a whirlwind, my heart pounding. Stupid, stupid. How could a man like me compete with Brad Pitt? How could that stupid woman tease me like that? Hasn't she already done enough to hurt me? Don't be such a damn idiot. I almost screamed at her. You can have your divorce, and to hell with it. Go with Brad, what's his name, and leave me alone. I abruptly put down my half-empty glass, spilling the contents all over the table, and angrily ran out of the hotel. But even as I left, I heard Jill burst into tears. God, what a mess I was in, and I just made it worse. Over the next period of time, I fought not to allow myself to fall back into the abyss of despair. The simplicity and finality of a quick divorce truly tested my deep resolve. But at least, I thought, I could finally move on, start rebuilding my ruined life, and think about the future. I don't know what I would have done without Mike and May's support during this period, as they once again proved what great friends they are. However, when the invitation came, I could hardly believe their impudence. Brad and Jill are happy to invite you to their wedding. Brad and Jill? I've never met this guy. I never wanted to, never again. May helped me figure this out. She tried to convince me that by coming and smiling, I could maybe get closure. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't completely honest with my friend May and decided to attend, but it had nothing to do with closure or forgiveness. I never admitted it, but it was a kind of masochistic desire. I wanted to suffer. I wanted Jill to see me there, with tears and a sense of loss in her eyes. With a little luck, it could ruin her big day. I turned into the castle car park, deep in the Kentish countryside where the ceremony and celebration were to take place. It was a wedding exclusively for OK Magazine, where invitations were worth their weight in gold, and the paparazzi were kept at bay by an army of security guards. At least my car barely matched the level among Bentleys, Ferraris, top-end Mercedes, and everyone else. Even dressed in my best suit, I felt so awkward among all these rich and famous people I had heard and seen so often while following the progress of my now ex-wife. Alan Sugar, what a surprise. There had been rumors about him and Jill for a while now. So many movie stars that I lost count, although I did manage to exchange a few words with Halle Berry, whom I've always liked. Even Victoria Beckham chatted with me for a while until David apologized that he had to take her away. What a sweet woman she turned out to be, Posh Spice. I would never have thought about it, knowing about it from the press. I simply told everyone that I was an old friend of Jill's from way back, without having the nerve or desire to tell them the truth. It wasn't all that bad until we were called to order and directed to the ancient chapel where the wedding ceremony was to take place. Then the pain started, and my chest tightened, and I seriously began to regret coming. It wasn't doing me any good at all, and I really didn't want to cause Jill any harm. Brad Pitt, to hell with him. In fact, he never did harm to me. Jill walked in, holding the hand of her father, Bert, who had served in the same role at our wedding years before, and I wondered what he was thinking and whether he felt even more out of place than I did at that moment. Jill looked left and right, smiling at special friends and family, but acted as if she was desperately looking for someone in particular. Yes, that's it. She noticed me, and our eyes met. I felt a coldness envelop me as I looked at her. She was so beautiful, and I was on the verge of losing her completely. Jill whispered some silent words to me, and I swear she said, "I'm sorry, darling. Please forgive me." And then she walked past. She walked past me and went to her new husband, who was waiting for her at the altar. The service began, and I felt bad. I desperately waited for it to end, desperately wanted to escape from my humiliation and torment. Why the hell did I agree to come? I heard Jill say, "I do," but the rest went over my head. This continued until the minister asked that magical and rather stupid question, "Is there anyone here who has grounds against this marriage? Speak now or remain silent forever." I can't remember the exact words until now, but you get the idea, don't you? I bit my tongue until I could taste the salty tang of my own blood in my mouth, and even then, I covered my mouth with my hand to stop myself from speaking. God knows whatever Jill did to me was very much my own stupid mistake, and no bride, not even Jill, deserved to be disgraced and humiliated like that. I exhaled slowly and relaxed as the moment passed, tears blurring my vision. I missed my chance. Too late. But what was this commotion playing out before me? What's happened? Why am I standing? Why is the minister standing there with his mouth wide open in surprise? Why is everyone looking at me? For God's sake, what did I just shout? What have I done? What did I do to ruin the day of the only woman I've ever loved? I was treated rather gently, come to think of it, when they took me out of the chapel. But then I offered no resistance as they led me out of the castle and left me in the parking lot, where I stood confused, wondering what the hell I had done. I ignored the puzzled looks from the waiting drivers and servants as they stared at me in bewilderment, not knowing why I was kicked out. Well, they'll find out soon enough. Staggering to my car, I hopped in and started the engine, roaring the powerful 4.0L engine in a futile gesture of defiance before speeding out of the parking lot with the throttle to the floor. Miraculously passing between two huge stone columns that had no doubt stood there for centuries, I raced along the road ahead, not caring about anyone or anything, not worrying whether I would crash or not. As I watched the huge sycamore trees lining the sides of the road, I calculated how much faster I would need to drive to ensure I was destroyed if I decided to crash into one. What tree was this? The end. Luckily for both of us, I spotted a young girl on a horse leaving the field at the last moment and instinctively braked hard, the brake pedal shaking under my foot as the ABS intervened in my clumsy attempts to stop. I stopped, but it was close, and I sat there, cursing my own stupidity, while the poor girl fought for control of the spooked horse just feet in front of me. Stupid, damn stupid. With a look of completely justified anger, the girl finally turned her steed and walked off in another direction, while I sat there for a few more moments, recovering. I soon shifted into drive, switched off sport mode, and headed down the road at a more reasonable speed, soon turning onto the main road in the direction I had come from. Oh, if only we could start over again. If only. 10 minutes later, I noticed in the rearview mirror another car quickly approaching me, closing the distance at a significant speed. The press may be after my story or just someone in a hurry, perhaps rushing home to his beloved. Oh, if only. A bright red sports car zoomed past me, brushing the roadside, its Alfa Romeo badge on the grille registering something deep in my subconscious. No, it couldn't be. After he passed, the Alfa braked hard, diving in front of me and forcing me to brake hard. But despite my best efforts, I was unable to avoid the collision, and my car hit his, the nose of my big Jag causing the little Alfa to roll into the roadside ditch, where it slowly stopped. A red Alfa Romeo Spider sports car, just like the one Jill drove in the James Bond movie. Exactly the same as the one Fiat gave her after the film for such public advertising of their car. I sat there in shock. Did you really mean it, Greg? Jill demanded as she opened my door. Did you really mean that you still loved me and that I shouldn't marry Brad? So, that's what I said, huh? I guess I should. Jill was my only possible answer. I guess I never stopped loving you, darling. Sorry, I just can't do otherwise. Quickly then, honey, Jill urged, climbing into my passenger seat. Go before the press shows up. My bridesmaid's car is blocking the entrance, but they'll be past it soon. Where should I go? I asked, perplexed. To a hotel or somewhere, Jill replied sweetly, leaning in to kiss me. Take me home, darling. Please, let's just go home, okay? This is Mike speaking now, you know, May's husband, Greg's friend who almost messed things up by flirting too much with Jill a few years ago. The above story was as Greg wrote it down for May and me before he and Jill flew off about 6 months ago. Their lives soon became unbearable as the press stood at their doorstep, desperate for any information, as the story became the hottest news item in the media. We came to visit them by agreement, fighting our way through the media frenzy. They allowed us to enter through the front door only after we proved who we were to the policeman standing guard. 3 hours later, we quickly left and were soon forgotten by the few press that tried to follow us. The only difference was that it wasn't us at all, but Greg and Jill, dressed in our warm winter clothes. They deceived them, they deceived everyone. They were furious when they discovered the fraud, but were a little relieved when they realized that the story itself was interesting too. Then there was the question of the missing persons. Where are they? We did not know. No one seemed to know, although at regular intervals in the 6 months since then, we have received postcards from exotic locales from a couple called Gil and Reggie. Of course, we don't know anyone like that, but we make our own assumptions. And they always tell us how great everything is going for them and how much they love each other. Some of the cards showed beaches with a beautiful girl sunbathing topless in the background, but May noticed how much the girl looked like Jill. Well, obviously, both of them haven't changed much. If anyone knows where they are, Greg's mom probably does. We don't talk often, but sometimes we meet her in the supermarket. She just smiles and giggles at us, as if we are somehow complicit, but she doesn't tell us anything, and we never ask. They will appear when they are ready, I think. I've honestly never met a couple who were so suited for each other and so in love with each other. That is, of course, excluding my wife, May, and me. What do you think of our story today? In my opinion, my wife is completely wrong because she felt overconfident and allowed other men to do something unacceptable, which is unacceptable to me. What's your opinion? Write in the comments. Until new videos.